She had loved music for as long as she could remember, but it was never the kind of love that came with comfort or praise. It was quiet and patient, shaped by long hours alone and many small disappointments. While other children played outside, she sat near an old keyboard that barely worked, pressing keys softly so the neighbors would not complain. She learned early that music was not about showing off. It was about listening, about feeling, about staying even when things felt heavy. Her life was simple. She worked during the day, saved small amounts of money, and practiced whenever she could. There were days when her fingers ached and days when she questioned why she even tried. She was not surrounded by applause or encouragement. Most people around her saw music as a hobby, something nice but not serious. Still, she returned to it every night, not because she thought it would make her famous, but because it made her feel whole. Opportunities did not come easily. She had been overlooked many times. When events were organized, her name was rarely mentioned. When auditions happened, she often stood at the back of the line. She learned to wait without complaining. She learned to observe. Over time, she developed a deep understanding of sound, rhythm, and silence. She listened to broken notes and imagined how they could still belong. One day, she received an unexpected message. It was brief and unclear. Someone had heard her play once years ago and remembered her. They were organizing a small gathering centered around music. Nothing grand, but meaningful to those involved. They asked if she would come and play for a short time. There was one condition mentioned casually, almost as a warning. The piano available was old and in bad shape. Some keys did not respond. Some notes sounded dull. Others rang too sharply. They said this so she would not be surprised. She read the message more than once. Part of her wanted to say no. She imagined the embarrassment, the frustration, the way people might look at her if things went wrong. She knew how cruel silence could feel when it followed a failed performance. But another part of her felt calm. She had played on imperfect instruments her whole life. This was not new. What was new was being invited at all. She agreed. On the day of the gathering, she arrived early. The room was quiet and plain, filled with chairs that did not match and walls that carried faint echoes. In the corner stood the piano. Even from a distance, she could see its age. The surface was scratched, the color uneven. Some keys sat lower than others, as if tired from years of use. It did not look welcoming. It looked forgotten. A few people were already there, talking softly. Some glanced at her, curious but unsure. She felt their eyes but did not react. She placed her bag down slowly and walked toward the piano. She did not touch it yet. She just stood there for a moment, breathing, listening to the room. Every place has its own sound, even before music begins. She wanted to understand it. Someone nearby whispered that the piano barely worked. Another person shrugged and said it was all they had. No one sounded hopeful. No one sounded cruel either. It was more like quiet acceptance, as if failure was expected and already forgiven. She sat down carefully. The bench creaked under her weight. She pressed one key gently. The sound came out weak and uneven. She pressed another. It was louder, almost sharp. She moved her hand across a few more keys, testing, learning. The piano responded like an old voice, unpredictable but still alive. A familiar feeling settled in her chest. It was not fear exactly. It was focus. This was the moment where many people judged without speaking. This was where expectations formed quickly and quietly. She could feel the weight of it, but she did not let it rush her. She thought about her past, not in detail but in emotion. The long nights, the missed chances, the moments when she had played only for herself because no one else was listening. She realized that this piano was not testing her. It was simply being honest about what it was. The real test was whether she could be honest too. More people entered the room. The quiet conversations grew. Chairs filled. The piano remained untouched as everyone waited. Some looked at it with doubt. Others looked at her with curiosity. No one knew what to expect, and neither did she. But she trusted the process she had built inside herself over the years. She adjusted her posture and placed her hands on the keys again, this time with intention. She did not plan to impress. She did not plan to rush. She planned to listen and respond. She planned to treat the piano not as a broken object, but as a partner that needed care. Before playing, she paused. The room slowly became still. The air felt heavier, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen, even if they did not know what. Her fingers hovered above the keys, steady and calm. She knew the piano would not behave. She knew mistakes could happen. She accepted that fully. Instead of fearing it, she welcomed it. She understood something many people did not. Music does not come from perfection. It comes from connection. As she prepared to begin, a thought crossed her mind. If the piano failed completely, she would still sit there with dignity. If it surprised her, she would follow. Either way, she would remain present. That was something no broken instrument could take away from her. The first note was just seconds away. The room waited. The piano waited. And in that quiet moment, before sound existed, everything felt possible. This was not the start of a performance meant to impress. It was the start of a conversation between a woman and a piano that everyone else had already given up on. And though no one in the room knew it yet, this moment would change how they listened forever. As she sat at the piano, the room began to fill. People arrived slowly, filling the mismatched chairs and standing along the walls. Their conversations were quiet, polite, and full of curiosity. Some faces held doubt, others held hope, and a few seemed completely indifferent. She noticed them all but did not allow their thoughts to touch her. She had learned long ago that letting other people's opinions control her would only block the music she carried inside. She touched the keys gently, trying not to press too hard. The piano responded unevenly. Some notes were dull, almost dead, while others were sharp and harsh. She could feel the tension in the room, as if the air itself was waiting to see whether she could make something meaningful out of what everyone else saw as a mistake. Her own chest tightened, but she did not show it. She had faced hard moments before, and she knew that fear was only a part of the process. The first whispers began as she experimented with small, careful notes. People looked at each other and shook their heads slightly. One person muttered under their breath, "It won't work." She did not react. She had learned not to fight every thought or comment in the room. Instead, she focused on listening, on feeling the piano beneath her fingers, and on understanding what it could do rather than what it could not. She pressed a key and listened to the sound carefully. She had played on worse instruments, she reminded herself. She thought of the small, broken keyboard she had learned on, of the nights she spent alone trying to make music from keys that sometimes refused to move. This piano, despite its flaws, had character. It had a story to tell if she could only hear it. Her mind became calm as she adjusted to the uneven response of the instrument. Instead of trying to force perfection, she accepted imperfection. She tried a simple melody first, soft and slow. The notes were not clean, but they were honest. She noticed the people in the room leaning slightly forward, as if drawn by the quiet courage in the sound. Some frowned, unsure of what they were hearing. Others were intrigued. A few held their breath. The piano made strange sounds when she moved her hands quickly, but she began to understand these as opportunities rather than obstacles. The harsh, high notes could be soft and expressive if played differently. The dull, sticky keys could add weight and depth to a phrase. She was not battling the piano. She was learning it. Every moment became a conversation, a negotiation, a discovery. She felt alive in a way she had not felt before. The pressure in the room increased as she continued. People were silent now, all attention on her. Some had expected failure and now were curious. Others had not expected anything and were surprised at how her hands moved with patience and care. She did not try to impress them. She tried only to listen and respond. She remembered moments from her past when she had been judged too soon. Teachers, family members, and strangers had sometimes looked at her and seen only mistakes. She had learned not to carry anger or resentment, but to use those memories to focus. Every discouragement had trained her to be patient, to wait, and to observe before reacting. This was one of those moments. She let the piano teach her instead of trying to dominate it. Her first simple melody began to change as she experimented with dynamics. She pressed some keys harder, held others longer, and allowed silence to breathe between the notes. The room felt different now. People were leaning in, noticing subtle changes, following the small variations in rhythm and tone. Even though the piano was far from perfect, the music started to feel alive. She smiled faintly inside. It was working. Some in the audience began to whisper again, but this time their words were different. They spoke of surprise and curiosity. "She is making it sound good," one said quietly. Another shook their head in disbelief. She did not notice them directly, but she could feel the shift in energy. The room was beginning to engage, even with the piano's flaws. Her own confidence grew quietly. She knew she was not playing for approval. She was playing for understanding. She took a deep breath and tried a more complicated passage. Her fingers moved carefully, avoiding rushing. She allowed the broken notes to speak for themselves. Some notes rang sharp, some barely spoke, and some responded perfectly. Each imperfection became part of a larger pattern. She noticed how the unevenness of the piano forced her to slow down, to pay attention, to truly listen. She had never played like this before, and it felt fresh and exciting. The room was completely quiet now, the only sound the uneven music flowing from the piano. She could sense people holding their breath, waiting to see if she could continue without faltering. She focused on the sound, not on the expectation. Every note was a choice, a small decision about how to respond to imperfection. She felt the piano's personality, its history, its wear and tear. It was alive through her. A sudden harsh note rang out unexpectedly. It was jarring and some people flinched. She paused, considered it, and then continued without hesitation. She had learned that mistakes were not failures. They were opportunities. She allowed the jarring note to lead into a soft, slow passage. The tension became part of the music, and the sound felt richer. People in the room were captivated, even those who had doubted her at first. As she continued, she felt a sense of liberation. The piano could not be perfect, and she did not need it to be. All she needed was understanding, patience, and care. Her music began to flow naturally, each phrase responding to the imperfections of the keys. The room seemed to breathe with her, following the rhythms, noticing the subtle variations, and becoming part of the moment. She remembered the times she had felt underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. All those moments had prepared her for this. She had learned to trust her own instincts, to adapt, and to find beauty where others saw only flaws. The piano, once dismissed as unplayable, had become a partner in expression. Its voice, though uneven, was real, honest, and powerful in a way that polished perfection could never be. The people in the room began to lean forward, their faces softening. Some closed their eyes to listen more closely. The whispers stopped entirely. The quiet became intense, focused entirely on the sound that came from the piano and the skill of the woman who guided it. She had not tried to impress anyone, yet she had captured the attention of all. Her hands moved with increasing confidence. She did not rush. She did not force. She did not demand anything from the piano. Instead, she let it respond in its own way, shaping the music around the unusual sounds. She discovered new rhythms, unexpected harmonies, and subtle textures. Each imperfection became a chance to explore, and she explored without fear or hesitation. A soft smile crossed her face as she noticed the change in energy. The room was no longer full of doubt or judgment. It was full of attention, curiosity, and quiet admiration. People were beginning to hear the piano differently because she had shown them a different way to listen. She had not needed perfection to create meaning. She slowed down intentionally, letting the final notes of her piece linger. The unevenness of the piano created pauses and textures that added depth to the music. Each sound, no matter how flawed, became part of the story she was telling. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but calm acknowledgement of what had been achieved through patience, focus, and care. When the last note faded, there was a brief silence. The room held its breath. People did not immediately react. They seemed to need a moment to adjust, to process what they had just heard. Some looked surprised, others impressed, and a few smiled faintly. She did not move right away. She remained seated, hands resting lightly on the keys, breathing steadily. She had faced doubt and pressure, and she had not only survived but thrived. The piano, once seen as unplayable, had spoken through her. She had learned that music was not about perfection, applause, or judgment. It was about understanding, patience, and connection. She had spoken through the piano, and the people in the room had listened in a way that went beyond expectation. As she finally stood and stepped back, she felt a quiet energy in the room. Eyes followed her with respect and curiosity. Some people whispered again, but this time the words carried admiration. She knew that the journey was not over. The piano had more stories to tell, and she had more music to discover. But for now, in this room, she had turned doubt into focus, pressure into creativity, and an impossible piano into a voice worth listening to. She took a moment to breathe, letting the last sound linger in the room like a soft echo. The audience remained quiet, as if unsure whether to break the spell that had formed. She felt calm now, not because she was confident in perfection, but because she had learned to trust the music itself. This piano, though imperfect, had become a partner, and she began to realize she could let it lead her in unexpected ways. She placed her hands lightly on the keys and started again, this time slower and with a different approach. She stopped thinking about mistakes and instead thought about listening. Every key had its own personality. Some resisted, some responded quickly, some sang in ways she had not expected. Instead of pushing the piano to conform, she let it guide her, shaping her fingers around its temperament. The audience began to lean forward again, sensing the shift in her focus. She had stopped trying to impress and started exploring. Her movements became fluid, almost conversational, as if she were speaking directly to the piano and asking it questions. The uneven keys became textures in her music. The rough sounds became emotional brushstrokes, and the sticky notes became pauses full of meaning. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly free. She was not competing with anyone or anything. The piano did not care about judgments. It did not care about her reputation. It only existed in the moment, and so did she. This awareness allowed her to let go of worry and start experimenting. She found patterns that worked with the piano rather than against it. A dull key became the start of a gentle passage. A sharp note became an accent that added tension and release. She discovered rhythms she had never noticed before, patterns hidden in the unevenness of the instrument. The piano, once seen as broken, now felt alive and expressive. The room held its breath. People were captivated, not just by the sound, but by the connection they could feel between her and the piano. They were witnessing something rare. A musician listening instead of forcing, understanding instead of demanding, creating instead of proving. Their doubts from the beginning melted quietly, replaced by curiosity and admiration. Her fingers moved with growing confidence, guided by instinct and by the personality of the piano. She did not plan every note. She responded to the sounds as they came. Every phrase was a conversation, every pause a breath, every harsh note a moment to shape something beautiful. The music began to feel organic, alive, and deeply human. She allowed silence to play a role. Some notes were held longer than expected. Some pauses lingered, giving the audience time to absorb and reflect. The imperfections of the piano became part of the emotional texture. She had learned that music was not just about sound. It was about timing, space, and emotion. The piano's flaws allowed her to explore those elements in ways she never had before. As she played, she noticed subtle changes in the room. People who had been skeptical were leaning forward. Faces that had been doubtful now reflected concentration, curiosity, even wonder. Some eyes closed to feel the music more fully. Others watched every movement of her hands. She could feel the energy shift and knew it was not from the piano alone. It was the result of listening, patience, and presence. She began a passage that used the most difficult keys, the ones that had resisted earlier. Her fingers adjusted naturally, finding ways to make them sing instead of forcing them to perform as expected. Each wrong note was incorporated, shaped, and given meaning. The piano was no longer a challenge to overcome. It was a partner in creativity, showing her new paths she had not imagined. A harsh note rang out, startling in its suddenness. She smiled quietly and let it resonate, following it with a soft, flowing passage that balanced the tension. The audience was mesmerized. They could feel the intentionality behind every choice, the patience behind every response. This was no longer a performance about impressing anyone. It was about exploration, communication, and shared experience. Her confidence grew with every moment. She no longer feared the piano's flaws. She embraced them. The instrument's unevenness pushed her to think differently, to find beauty in unexpected places, and to listen with more care. She realized that true skill was not about forcing perfection, but about understanding, adapting, and creating with honesty. The music became richer, layered with subtle emotions. The audience responded instinctively, moved by the depth of feeling. Some whispered to each other softly, trying to describe what they were experiencing. Others simply sat, completely absorbed, letting the sounds wash over them. She did not notice these reactions directly. She focused entirely on the music and the piano, letting it guide her hands and heart. As she explored further, she discovered contrasts she had not intended. A sharp, bright note followed by a soft, lingering chord created tension and release. The sticky keys added rhythm and texture she had not known was possible. She began to understand that imperfection could become the most expressive tool of all. The piano, once thought impossible, had given her freedom. She allowed herself to feel the emotions that emerged naturally from the music. Some passages were joyful, others wistful, and some quietly powerful. The piano responded differently to each feeling, and she adapted with care. She realized that the music was not just coming from her, nor just from the piano. It was the combination of both, a conversation between musician and instrument, guided by emotion and attention. The audience was completely captivated now. The room was silent except for the sounds of the piano. People leaned closer, held their breath, or closed their eyes. The connection between her and the piano had created a shared experience that went beyond expectation. Everyone present felt that something unusual, something real, was unfolding. She played longer than she had intended. The music flowed naturally, shifting from soft and delicate to bold and expressive, following the guidance of the piano itself. She discovered hidden possibilities, harmonies, and rhythms that she had never noticed. Each note, each pause, each sound became meaningful, and the imperfections were celebrated rather than hidden. For the first time, she felt that the piano was no longer her enemy. It was a teacher, a guide, and a collaborator. Its flaws were not limitations but opportunities to explore new paths. She realized that she had been learning this truth her whole life. Creativity is born from understanding, patience, and openness to the unexpected. The room seemed to breathe with her, following the rise and fall of the music. Some people whispered in awe, others nodded quietly, and a few smiled softly. They could feel that the piano was alive in a new way, not through repair or perfection, but through the connection she had established. She had not tried to impress anyone, yet she had captured their full attention. She began to slow down, letting the music take a more reflective tone. The final passages were soft, with gentle pauses that allowed each sound to resonate. The piano, once considered impossible, had become a voice, expressing ideas and emotions beyond what words could convey. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from applause or recognition, but from the act of listening, adapting, and creating. When the final note faded, there was a pause so complete that it felt as if the room itself were holding its breath. The audience was still, processing the journey they had just witnessed. She remained seated, hands resting lightly on the keys, breathing steadily. The moment was not about her or the piano alone, but about the connection between the two and the shared experience that had unfolded. In that silence, she realized something important. Music was not about perfection or control. It was about understanding, patience, and courage. It was about listening and responding, shaping and being shaped. The piano had shown her new possibilities, and she had responded with presence and care. Together, they had created something unexpected and real. She finally stood and stepped back. The room seemed to exhale with her, releasing the tension that had built. People looked at her with respect, curiosity, and quiet admiration. Some whispered softly, others nodded, but all had experienced something that would linger with them. The piano, once dismissed as unplayable, had spoken through her, and the people had listened in a new way. As she left the piano, she felt a deep sense of calm. The journey was not over. There were more notes to discover, more connections to explore, and more music to create. But in this moment, she had learned a vital truth. Listening, understanding, and responding could transform even the most difficult circumstances into beauty. She had made the impossible sing, not through force, but through patience, care, and heart. She returned to the piano after a short pause, feeling a quiet determination settle in her chest. The previous passages had been exploratory, delicate, and careful, but now she wanted to see what could emerge if she let herself go further. She was not afraid anymore, not of mistakes or judgment. The piano had shown her that imperfection could be transformed into beauty, and she intended to follow that lesson to its fullest. Her hands moved lightly over the keys at first, tracing small, gentle patterns. The piano responded in its uneven, unpredictable way, and she let it. Instead of trying to control each note, she followed the sound, listening to how it carried, how it resonated, and how it contrasted with the next. She felt herself becoming one with the instrument, her thoughts quieting as the music spoke. The audience watched in hushed attention. Some leaned forward, eager to see how she would handle the next challenge. Others had closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. The energy in the room was different now. There was no longer doubt or expectation, only curiosity and quiet respect. She could sense their engagement, but it did not distract her. She was entirely present, aware of the piano, the room, and herself in a way that felt rare and profound. She began a sequence that moved quickly across the keyboard, testing the limits of the piano's responsiveness. Some keys stuck, others rang sharply, and a few barely sounded at all. Each difficulty became part of the music. The rough, unexpected sounds were not obstacles. They were accents, textures, and voices that added depth and character. She adapted naturally, allowing the piano to guide her fingers and ideas. As she played, a sense of rhythm emerged that had not existed before. The piano's flaws created patterns that were unpredictable but compelling. She discovered that what once seemed like mistakes could become moments of tension and release. Each uneven sound became a brushstroke in a larger painting, a note in a story being told for the first time. She felt exhilaration at the possibilities that were opening up. Her music became more expressive, moving from gentle, reflective phrases to bold, confident passages. She allowed herself to play faster at times, to embrace the harsh sounds, to follow the piano wherever it led. The audience could feel the shift, sensing that this was not a performance of perfection, but a performance of honesty, emotion, and discovery. The room became a space where music was alive, fragile, and real. She experimented with dynamics, exploring how the piano could sound soft and tender in one moment, and strong and commanding in the next. She let pauses stretch, letting silence become as meaningful as the notes themselves. Every harsh, uneven sound was integrated into the flow, creating texture and depth that surprised even her. She had never played like this before, and the freedom felt invigorating. The audience reacted subtly, leaning closer, closing their eyes, or simply remaining still, absorbed in the unfolding soundscape. Some whispered to each other softly, marveling at how the piano could sound so alive. Others nodded quietly, realizing that the performance was unlike anything they had expected. She was not performing for applause or approval. She was performing for understanding, for connection, for the music itself. As she continued, a particularly harsh key rang out sharply. Many musicians would have tried to avoid it, to mask it, or to correct it. She did the opposite. She let it resonate fully, allowing it to lead into a softer, flowing passage. The contrast created tension and release, a dialogue between roughness and beauty. The piano, in its imperfection, had given her a new tool, a new voice, a new way to express herself. She discovered patterns that had not been intentional but emerged naturally from the piano's quirks. Sticky keys added rhythm, uneven tones created unexpected harmonies, and sharp notes became accents. Every flaw was an opportunity. She realized that the piano was teaching her lessons she could not have learned on a perfect instrument. Patience, adaptation, and creativity born from listening. Her fingers moved more confidently now, exploring combinations of notes that were unpredictable and exciting. She was no longer simply playing. She was improvising, responding, shaping, and being shaped by the piano. The audience felt the energy and emotion, sensing the interplay between musician and instrument, the story unfolding in real time. There was a sense of discovery, shared quietly and intimately between her and those listening. She allowed herself to feel the music fully. Joy, tension, surprise, and reflection all flowed naturally through her hands. She realized that the piano's imperfections made the emotions more honest, more immediate, more human. Each note, each pause, each unexpected sound contributed to a richer, more complex musical narrative. The piano's voice, once dismissed as flawed, was now full of life and expression. The audience remained captivated. Some faces were soft with wonder, others concentrated deeply, and a few smiled quietly, moved by the unexpected beauty. She did not notice or seek their reaction. She was immersed in the moment, in the music, in the dialogue with the piano. The connection was unspoken but palpable, creating a shared experience that transcended words. She explored further, moving into a series of phrases that were daring and unconventional. The piano responded unpredictably, and she adapted naturally, letting each sound guide the next. The music felt alive, as if it had a life of its own, emerging from the imperfections and limitations of the instrument. She was not controlling it. She was listening and shaping, allowing the piano to speak through her. The energy in the room grew. People were leaning forward, eyes closed, absorbing the music, or watching every movement of her hands. The piano, once dismissed as unplayable, had become a vessel for expression, emotion, and story. She was not just playing notes. She was conveying ideas, feeling, and truth. The imperfections of the instrument had become integral to the performance, creating a depth and richness that could not have existed on a perfect piano. As she played, she allowed the tempo to shift naturally, moving between calm, reflective passages and bold, assertive moments. Each change was guided by the piano's voice and her own intuition. She embraced unpredictability, using it to create tension, surprise, and resolution. The audience was completely absorbed, witnessing a rare combination of skill, emotion, and presence. She felt a deep sense of freedom and exhilaration. The piano, once feared as impossible, had become a teacher, a collaborator, and a partner. Its flaws were no longer obstacles but opportunities. She realized that true artistry was not about perfection or control, but about listening, responding, and creating in harmony with what was present. The piano had shown her a new way to make music, and she had followed willingly. The final passages of her performance were soft, reflective, and full of subtle emotion. She let each note resonate, allowed pauses to breathe, and embraced the unique qualities of the piano. The room held a quiet stillness, as if time itself had slowed to listen. The audience felt the authenticity and depth of the performance, moved by the interplay between the musician and the instrument. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of complete silence. The room seemed to pause, absorbing the music and the experience that had unfolded. She stood quietly, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment, not from applause or recognition, but from the realization that she had created something real, something meaningful, and something alive. The piano, once dismissed as unplayable, had spoken through her. She had discovered new textures, new rhythms, and new ways to express emotion. The audience, though initially doubtful, had witnessed a transformation, not just of sound, but of perception. They had seen what patience, understanding, and presence could achieve. The impossible piano had been made to sing, not through force or perfection, but through connection, attention, and heart. She stepped back, breathing steadily, and allowed the room to process what had just occurred. Some people whispered softly, others nodded in quiet admiration. Everyone had been touched by the experience, even if they could not explain it in words. The piano, imperfect and flawed, had become a voice, and she had been the guide. The lesson was clear. True music comes from listening, adapting, and embracing imperfection. And in that moment, everyone present understood it. She stepped back from the piano, letting the last note fade and the room remain in quiet reflection. There was no immediate applause, no rush of sound to fill the space. Instead, there was a pause, a weightless moment in which everyone seemed to absorb what had just occurred. The music lingered in the air, as though the piano itself had been transformed into something alive, something that could speak and be heard in a new way. She felt a calm satisfaction, not from recognition, but from knowing she had created something meaningful from imperfection. As she looked around, she noticed the faces of the people who had gathered. Some were staring at the piano, as if it had suddenly become magical. Others were looking at her with a quiet sense of respect, unsure how to express the feelings that had arisen. She realized that she had not only changed the way the piano sounded, but also the way people experienced it. The impossible piano had become a voice, and through it, they had heard something more than notes and chords. They had felt patience, understanding, and courage expressed in sound. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Years of practice in small, quiet rooms, alone with imperfect instruments, had prepared her for this moment. She remembered the nights when she had played for herself, the evenings when mistakes were her only companions, and the quiet victories that no one else had witnessed. All of those experiences had led her to understand that music is not about perfection, but about listening, responding, and creating with honesty. The room remained still, and she allowed herself to feel the energy of it. She did not need applause or praise to know that what had happened was real. The connection between her, the piano, and the people in the room was tangible. She had faced doubt and challenge, both from the instrument and from expectations, and she had found a way to transform it into beauty. That was enough. Some people began to whisper quietly to one another, trying to describe the unexpected depth and richness of the music they had heard. Others simply sat, letting the sounds settle in their minds and hearts. She could feel their thoughts and emotions without needing to hear their words. The piano, once dismissed as impossible, had become a storyteller, and she had been its interpreter. She thought about how often life presents challenges that seem impossible at first. People encounter situations where the tools they are given, or the circumstances they face, feel inadequate or broken. It is easy to focus on the flaws, to see only limitations and give up. But she had learned that if one listens carefully, adapts, and responds with care and patience, what seems impossible can become extraordinary. She had proven that not by changing the piano, but by changing the way she approached it. Her mind wandered to the future. There would be more instruments, more challenges, more moments when the odds felt stacked against her. She knew now that each one carried potential. The key was to approach with attention, to let curiosity guide action, and to embrace imperfection as an ally rather than an enemy. Each experience could teach, inspire, and transform, just as this piano had done. She walked slowly around the room, feeling the energy shift. The audience was no longer waiting for a performance. They were reflecting, considering, and absorbing. She saw a few people nodding quietly, acknowledging the courage it had taken to play without fear. Others were simply smiling softly, touched by the honesty in the music. She did not seek recognition, but she recognized the impact nonetheless. The piano had spoken, and so had she, In her quiet reflection, she thought about the nature of art and expression. It was not the tools that made the difference, but the heart behind them. A perfect instrument could be played carelessly, while a flawed one could be made to sing if approached with understanding and intention. She realized that every person has the potential to turn limitations into strength, to create beauty where others see only difficulty. The piano had been a teacher in that lesson, showing her that challenges are not obstacles but opportunities. She returned to the piano one last time, placing her hands lightly on the keys. She did not play a formal piece, nor did she plan a performance. Instead, she allowed the music to flow naturally, soft and gentle, letting the room absorb it. Each note was deliberate yet relaxed, shaped by intuition and the personality of the instrument. She could feel the piano responding, the imperfect notes weaving together into something cohesive and alive. The experience was private yet shared, intimate yet universal. The audience watched quietly, sensing the finality of this moment. They did not speak, did not move, allowing the music and the silence to coexist. She had learned that music is as much about absence as presence, as much about pause as sound. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation had a purpose. She was not performing for them. She was inviting them to witness a story told through connection and attention. She smiled faintly, knowing that this performance, though small in scale, would remain in the memories of those present. They had seen what dedication, patience, and openness could create. They had witnessed the transformation of a broken instrument into a voice, the conversion of doubt into confidence, and the unfolding of a human heart through music. That impact, silent yet profound, was more meaningful than applause. As the last note settled into silence, she stood fully and stepped back. The piano, though unchanged, had been transformed in essence by the interaction, and so had the room. People began to move slowly, some still whispering, others reflecting quietly. She felt no need to explain or justify what had happened. The music had spoken for itself, carrying its own story, and the audience had listened with their hearts. She thought about the lessons she would carry forward. She had learned that perfection is not necessary to create impact, that patience and attention can reveal hidden possibilities, and that challenges often hold the key to unexpected beauty. Every broken key, every uneven sound, every moment of doubt had become an essential part of the music. Without them, the story could not have been told. She realized that life itself is like that piano, imperfect, unpredictable, and full of potential if approached with care and presence. As she left the room, she felt a quiet sense of completion. The journey was not about recognition or success in the usual sense, but about discovery, connection, and courage. She had faced what seemed impossible and had turned it into something meaningful, not by force, but by listening, adapting, and embracing imperfection. The piano had taught her a profound lesson, one that she would carry into every future challenge. Outside, the day continued, the world moving as usual, but she felt changed. The music, the connection, and the understanding she had gained would remain with her. She knew there would be more pianos, more difficulties, and more moments when the odds seemed stacked against her. Yet she also knew that each challenge held potential for discovery and beauty, just as this one had. She had made the impossible sing, and the lesson would resonate far beyond that room. She walked away with quiet satisfaction, carrying the knowledge that what had been created was real, meaningful, and human. The music had been more than notes. It had been patience, courage, attention, and heart made audible. The impossible piano had not only sung, it had changed the way she saw possibility, and in that moment, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and quiet triumph.